Did Jesus Christ of Nazareth actually exist? This is an extremely loaded, controversial, and difficult question to answer. First of all, if we look at this question from a purely unbiased, with no pre-established religious, spiritual biases or ideologies, and we look at it purely from a historical standpoint, this almost seems to be a ridiculous question, because that is like asking, did Bob from Kansas City, Missouri exist? Or did Tony from New York City exist? Or did Chad from Los Angeles exist? And I'm saying that because Nazareth was a heavily populated area, and Jesus, or rather Yeshua, because Jesus is a more Anglo-Saxon sort of interpretation of the name Yeshua. Yeshua would have been what Jesus' name actually would have been, was an extremely popular name in the Middle East, very specifically in Israel and its immediately surrounding areas for centuries. So an extremely popular name in an extremely populated area means that, Jesus of Nazareth more than likely existed. Now, the real question is, did the mythological character of Jesus that we now know him as actually exist? And that is where things get rather dicey and difficult to answer. Now, there are a lot of mainstream historians who are very much concurrent with the idea that Jesus of Nazareth actually existed. For instance, the historian Byron McCain has made a quote that he doesn't know of any serious academic researchers or historians that doubt the existence of Jesus. And this has been latched onto by Christian apologists and taken for granted, and it's extremely, I suspect, face value. But the reality is that a lot of people, and a lot of really educated people, actually doubt the existence of Jesus. Now, this is not to say that they doubt the existence of a guy named Jesus from Nazareth, or a great teacher even from Nazareth whose name was Jesus, or rather Yeshua, but this is saying that they doubt that there was a divine magician named Jesus from Nazareth. In other words, they doubt that there was anybody worthy of being deified into a godlike status that we now know as Jesus of Nazareth. So when we're actually asking these questions, a lot of people are really trying to ask, did Jesus the Christ, or Jesus the Messiah, actually exist? Now then, we have to look at a little bit of a philosophical, historical standpoint to really understand the questions being asked here. Thomas Carlyle, for instance, came out with the great man theory, and he's saying that most deities, be it Zeus or Thor or Odin or Jesus, were rooted in actual historical characters, but they later became deified. And J.R.R. Tolkien, the writer of the Lord of the Rings series, The Hobbit, so on and so forth, seems to concur with this idea and emphasize this idea to a degree in his essay on fairy tales, which he says that all fairy tales have a degree of reality to them. Like if we're looking at William Tell, for instance, we now know that William Tell, thanks to Jacob Grimm's, was a much older pagan story that later became a Christianized Swiss hero, the Swiss patriotic hero that we now know him as. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a real William Tell, or a real character that inspired the William Tell story. And that's what J.R.R. Tolkien is arguing for, is that there's a sense of reality to them, but they become hyper-real within our imagination because they take on psychological aspects very much akin to what Carl Gustav Jung would have called archetypes. And of course, the later mythologist Joseph Campbell also agrees with this ideology. So we have Thomas Carlyle, we've got Carl Gustav Jung, we've got Jacob Grimm, we've got J.R.R. Tolkien, Joseph Campbell. We got all these guys agreeing that historical figures can exist and more than likely did exist in some regard, in some way, shape, or form, and then they later became deified. But does that make the reality of a deity on this earth something that we need to give serious thought to? And that's where a lot of people are in serious doubt. In a 2015 poll in Britain, there was 4,000 people, if I remember correctly, that were surveyed, and 40% of them did not believe in the existence of Jesus. Now then, there's a huge gulf in interpretation that we need to bridge the gap of, because a lot of historians are thinking that people doubt the overall existence of Jesus, that a guy named Jesus who lived in Nazareth and was potentially a good teacher just simply did not exist. And I don't believe this is what 40% of people are actually believing or advocating for. I believe that they are simply doubting that there was a man named Jesus who claimed to be the Son of God and who turned water into wine, and this is a logical doubt because there is absolutely zero historical evidence to suggest that there was a man named Jesus who performed miracles. We only know of Jesus who had a mythology and a legend and a lore developed around him. And now then, if we're looking from a mythological standpoint, we have to ask the question, which Jesus existed, if any Jesus existed? Because if we look at Jesus from a mythological standpoint, we could have a lot of enlightening and spiritually advancing ideas that we could play with this, but Christianity has not been a mythology for nearly 2,000 years. Ever since it was legalized and formalized by the Roman government, it became a religion, and so it became strictly doctrinized and very much a strict theology with a strict set of rules and a strict interpretation that a lot of people are not allowed freedom to interpret the way that we can interpret mythologies like neo-paganism, Celtic paganism, Nordic paganism, so on and so forth. So when we're looking at Jesus from a religious standpoint, no, there is absolutely zero evidence of a religious Jesus that is held by the Christian religion to this day. If we look at Jesus from a mythological standpoint, there most certainly was a character, Jesus, and this character, Jesus, can symbolize something to us in our modern world as a form of self or a form of spiritual wholeness or integration with the subconscious, but we don't have the luxury of seeing Jesus in this manner in our modern world.